Eucerines really can be confusing on several of the key characters, which we're going to get into. If we have time, we'll get into the infamous Svastra spatulate hairs, which was one that took me a long time to figure out. I'm going to share my screen now, and we will. I just want to check that I have the scope up and running. I see a picture of the scope. Why is there no? And it was working a second ago. On live fast. Oh, I know why. How about that? Okay, I was using the microscope. Okay, we are good. I've got a Melissodes in place here. Let's get the exposure right and the white balance better. Okay, I'm going to go back to the cheat sheet. So we're looking at Melissodes. One thing in the Eucerines in general is, why is that not showing up? There we go. In the Eucerines in general, we move this box. Pardon me. Good thing I don't have COVID. Okay, so all the Eucerines have a very flat top of the head. You'll see this as we go through. So in contrast to specimens such as Tilothrix and even the Anthophora groups, we're seeing a whole bunch of things. Claire, you might be clicking very loudly, perhaps. I'm not sure, but I'm hearing a clicking sound. So that flat top is a good character to look for, so it knows that you know that you're in the Eucerine groups. The males, which we're going to see first, all have very long antennae that go usually sweep back beyond the tegula if they were to be projecting backwards. We're going to just go now and look at things like the T7 teeth, in Melissodes, a key character that, again, is difficult often to get in sync with is that the tegula is not symmetrical. In other words, it's not a nice oval. It's got a flattened to actually concave side, but it's often hidden by hairs. And what else? And it also, the Melissodes group in general is usually has a relatively flat clypeus compared to Eucera, which we'll see in a second. So let's jump now to here. And what we're looking at is Melissodes trinodus and the male. And even from up here, you can see that the vertex, the top of the head here is relatively flat. I'm going to spin it further to the side. And also you're seeing really long antennae too. So that those two right off would say a Eucerine rather than a couple of the others like the I guess I forget what the group is in a label, but things in the Tilothrix, Melitoma, clade. Someone could put that into the chat and let us know what the technical term for that group is. Emperini? No, I'm not sure. And yeah.
Real quick, you have a male there, but the Melissodes tegula, is that in females only? The asymmetrical tegula?
It's in both. But I will show you in the female because in the male you have other characters that are often as good or easier than trying to look at the tegula. And also you have a very small, in terms of ratios, F1 flagellar segment compared to F2 is hugely long. And at a species level, those ratios can be important, but it gets into almost technical level to measure those ratios. And if you don't have a measuring reticule, then it's really an eyeball kind of thing. So there is those things there that first off would tell you, oh, I've got a Eucerine, and then it's like which one, and now I'm trying not to snap the antenna off, although we're really not going to look at that anymore. And then we're going to look now at the rear end of the male, and we're looking for two teeth, which again can be, not again, but is often difficult for people to find on these males. I'm going to cock it sideways. I saw this when I was pulling specimens. Let's see if I can make that appear in the, yeah, here we go. Okay, so they're often hidden by hairs, and this is a good, yet another good reason to really wash your and dry and clean your specimens well, because if the hairs are all matted down, a lot of these features are subtle and can be basically hidden by a clot. So here is T6, T7 is down here. Here's a what would be called a pygidial plate, which for practical purposes isn't that useful. I think all the Eucerines probably have that. It doesn't come up, at least in terms of identification. And here are the teeth that people talk about. So they're on the lateral sides. Here's a tooth on T6, and here's a tooth here on T7. So there's the T6 one. You can see it over here also at the far lateral edges, and you can see it there. We will see an example in a Eucera where it would appear to, so Eucera, that group has teeth only on T6, not on T7. However, you will see an example in Eucera, it's not in all of them, where the male appears to have a tooth on T7. But if you inspect it closely, what you will see is that specimen's tooth, or apparent tooth on T7, is actually associated not with the tergite, so tergites are the upper parts of the abdomen, but with the sternite. It's just peeking out. Like it could look like that, but if you it's on the sternite, not the tergite. So lots of things to look here. Nice specimens are really what you want to go for, because you have to look at this kind of stuff, and you'll see with the Sevastra and a couple other examples where really having poor specimens makes things an awful lot harder. So this large, those pairs there will largely define for you a male Melissodes. If we look, as we mentioned, that it has a relatively flat clypeus, I'm going to show it on its side. And you can see how the antennal segments are pretty extreme. T1, this is all T2. This clypeus is not bulging out, and you'll see literally in the Eucera group that it's just sticking way out. Almost all of them have yellow on the clypeus. The amount of yellow can be complete most of the time, and sometimes the amount of yellow is restricted to the bottom, sometimes even third. There may even be one, not sure which one, that I'm aware of that has no yellow there. So you also have a double check that you're not, for whatever reason, looking at a Anthophora group specimen. So that would be things like Anthophora, Abrapoda. Those would be the two main ones in the US. In Canada, maybe some others elsewhere. And that is requires you to look at the, just trying to get a good angle on this, on the, in the cells, the interior of the cells of the wing. I'm going to zoom in now. What we're looking at is in the Anthophora group, Abrapoda and Anthophora, the interior cells are largely absent of hairs. Of course, it's not complete, right? That would be way too convenient. But if you, in contrast, you're looking at here, I'm just changing the focus a little bit at a time, and you see The submarginals are here. This is the marginal cell, edge of the wing. This is hind wing stuff going on behind that. And so if we look at these internal cells, submarginals, and then these cells whose names I forget because we almost never use them, have hairs everywhere in there. I'm just going to roll through a little at a time the focus, and you can see that's the case. The edge of the wing, so this would be the outermost edge to the cells of the cells that are complete of the wing, and on the outer edge are these, I think they're called papillae sometimes, or papillate portions. I don't use this, and I forget exactly. It might be that there are hairs in there. I'm at the highest magnification, or there's a hair or not coming out. Between the two groups, the Anthophora related ones and the Eucerines, there are differences. Someone can put into the chat what those might be. Frankly, I don't use it. If I need to double check at that level, I'm looking at these internal hairs in the cells of the wing. So you can see it's uniform. There's a lot of them. There's no mistaking that there are hairs. A word of warning, I guess, is that in the Habropoda and Anthophora groups, there are a few hairs, but most of that territory there is without hairs. Okay, where's my box?
Sam, clarify, remind us what bee we were just looking at.
Melissodes trinodus.
Male.
Male, yes. Now we're going to do a Melissodes trinodus female. Let me bring down the magnification. Now it's changed. So here's that same flattened vertex. It's not absolutely flat, but it's not rounded as in some of the other groups. Very flat, but in the females, you can see the antennae are not remarkable in any way. They are relatively short and nothing at all like the male. So that is of no particular help in this group. They do have the wings with the minute hairs in them. The main and special character is to go to the tegula, and I scraped off the hairs on one side. Is it this side? Or was it? No, I think it's the other side. So well, let's look at this side first. So I believe this is the correct side. I'm going to zoom in.
This might be another good opportunity just to remind anybody who has not seen shaving technique. Just a quickie.
Yeah. So what I do is very simple. I think most people do this. Maybe someone else can share other ways. If you have to look at a structure and it's covered with hairs, no matter what, as is this tegula. So this tegula has hairs all over it. We want to see what the outer edge, the shape is on it. So we'd use the tip of a pin. You just carefully hold the specimen and bring in under the microscope the tip of the pin, and you just rub it back and forth, and these hairs will pop off. What's not apparent here is what's going on up here. And this tegula, as hopefully you'll see in the next picture, runs quite a ways out, and it can be very deceptive because you might say, well, that's oval, but these hairs really prevent you from making a declaration like that. So you need to scrape them off. And what you're going to look for is what's going on up here. And you'll see in the other one where instead of it being the tegula being a nice complete oval, this outer side from the greatest width here is either flat or it's in some cases concave versus just being an oval. But again, you almost never see that unless you have some kind of wet specimen, which is not what you want anyway, where the tegula is visible. Or you can see the hairs have been scraped off down here by that bird's nest. But let's see if I can get a shot of the actual tegula here too. Ooh, this may not be as easy to see as I had wished. Let me see if I can bend it this way a little bit more. So we're looking for this flattened edge. It did scrape off the hairs. So I could see it when I was looking at it, but we want you to see it too. And I'm not liking that shot. I'm gonna bend it over some more to hopefully get a better angle. Really only care about the outer edge and the tip, and that's all disguised in there by hairs. That, I believe, is even worse. Let me just take my pen here and see what I can do under the scope. This is getting into some interesting eye-hand coordination because it is different from looking under the scope. So I'm trying to brush away these hairs that I had pulled off and not snap anything off myself. I'm afraid this is not a super nice looking shot. Let's zoom in.
I think that I also have some photos and diagrams that I'll post.
Right. So after the fact, we'll have to look at some photos here. Oops, I just hit the specimen with my pin. And wow, this is really tricky here to do online. But this is how I get rid of hairs anyway. I'm taking the tip of the pin and scraping around down there, and they usually fall off. So maybe you can see it a little bit now. I'll run it on the pointer. So here's the back side, which is almost always visible, running like this. And the front side, which is occluded here, is largely flat, and then it curves around like that. This is very suboptimal, but we'll get some good pictures to show you. And I've got a couple others that are nice oval ones. Well, I thought this was a nice shot too, but it was not. So that's the female. There's apparently one species somewhere that also does not have that flattened edge, but many a person has gone down the wrong path because they have not seen that flattened edge. So we talked about the hairs here, but really that feature, that flattened edge, Melissodes is the only one that has that. So if we jump and we look at female, let's see if anything else. I think I'm not on Melissodes there. And Floralagus, which we're not going to talk about today because we don't have time, but a cool pickerelweed specialist. So I believe that is going to be the female. So it's mostly this tegula, not symmetrical. The clipeus, again, is not bulging very much, vertex flat. Interior of cells of the wing are with minute hairs. It's largish, so it's about nearly bumblebee size in a lot of cases. Or wait, no, I'm looking down at the next one. It's ambiguous. I'll also mention that a lot of times the Eucera group looks very similar. A very good tip is that Melissodes in general are late summer, fall species. Eucera are all spring species. There's a overlap zones in, let's say, June that sometimes is problematic, but a lot of times the two groups separate out just simply by dates, or at least should give you some indication of what the probability that I'm looking at a Eucera, spring, bulgy, Clypeus, or in the fall, Melissodes with its non-bulgy Clypeus. And then you can dial into these characters. Okay, let's look at.
Sam,
yeah,
real quick, we have a pretty good question. Not that there's any bad questions. I see that the Clypeus is pretty bare. Do the hairs rub off easily as the bee ages? I have thousands of specimens of Melissodes that look very similar, and I'm wondering if the Clypeus would be a quick tool to sort the females. Some specimens are very hairy and others mildly hairy in the females on the Clypeus.
You know, I have not really noticed that. I would say in general that there's not tons of hairs on any of the Eucerines Clippii. So it's possible, but I'm not using that. I'm not aware of other people using that as a ID feature. So if the question is, am I looking at Melissodes or something else? I think you would look. So that's in the females and the males too, come to think of it. So males even less hair. So yeah, I'm not finding that in my memory bank as something that's gets a lot of inspection. So I hope that's useful. So we're jumping now to Eucera. We're looking at Eucera hamata. Eucera hamata has a very unique feature, which I'll show here, that separates it out from everything in all the Eucerines, which is it's got a strongly hooked, well, at least in the east, it's got a strongly hooked rear tibial spine. Should be right there. Let's see if I can run that up to a higher level. Basically, it's the tip of it is at right angles. There it is, but it's facing the wrong way to take a look at. Let's try something like this. One thing about Eucera hamata is that it's super similar to Peponapus pruinosa in its general vibe. I'm using Peponapus here, but Peponapus has been lumped with Eucera now. I don't know. We use John Asher's list of species and names. I don't know if it's up to date on Discover Life or not. We'll certainly shift to that if that's what John goes with. But here's that hooked end. So they're very similar and now probably the same genus, but this hamata has this hooked area, whereas Peponapus does not have that. Otherwise, they look remarkably similar in terms of the colors and patterns of their hairs. Let's look at some Eucera level features now. Here we go. If we look on the side, and the females, it's even more so. So this is, again, is a male. And what we're seeing is a Clypeus that's much more mounded up than in the Melissodes. It does have the flattened head, so it's in the Eucera group. It does have long antennae. Tends to be a little less long than Melissodes, I would say, but probably not a great feature. It's going to have the hairs that are on the wing cells. You can see flattened head. This segment here is actually long compared to most of the Melissodes, and in comparison to the, I think right there would be T2. When we look now at the, and you can also use the tegula, which I'm not going to show because I'm going to show this in the females in terms of the shape. But we go to the rear end, we can see, I hope, that it only has, maybe I turn this a little bit. it only has a, yeah, I think I see it now, a tooth on T7. These in Eucera in particular males tend to be more difficult to spot. They, like in Melissodes, are on the lateral sides. So there's the tooth, right? Right there, hidden in this clump of hair. So again, you want to have nicely prepped specimens so that that's not just hidden by a clump of hairs that are all stuck together on your specimen, as would be the case if you didn't wash it well or clean it. Here's your pygidial plate, which we don't find that useful at this level. And on T7, which is this segment here, there is no tooth. But if you, it's not showing per se here, but if you turn this specimen over, or you turn it laterally, let's see if we can do this laterally first. See if it shows up. You'll see that there's a tooth there. It's not really showing in this bright area. Too many hairs. But it's also often visible from, I'm going to just turn it upside down. It's often visible from the top, because if I can get this to lighten up, hopefully we'll see this. Let's see if automatic exposure. Why doesn't it let me change the exposure? There's two flanges here. I'm going to try one more time. And dial back down there.
Do you have the vellum paper nearby that might help adjust the lighting?
Good idea. Yeah, it should be right here somewhere.
Also, while we're figuring out lighting, we have 2 requests for literature in the chat. Regarding if you can separate species by time of year, if morphology is dubious. Does anyone have any publications or sources for bee species seasonality, i.e. periodicity or phenology? And then we're also wondering, what are these teeth, these tegula and sternite teeth used for? If anybody knows.
So I don't know any answers about the teeth. They're there for a reason, but I don't know what they are. So let me try and fox this into shape with some paper. But what we're looking at here is, this is the sternite. There's usually a lot of stuff going on, and including these expanded areas in Eucera and not in Melissodes. But it's not the primary. It's not the primary ID tool. I'm not getting much here out of this at this point. You one, that's one. How about that for difficult to see? Let's just try automatic. Oh, look at that. So here's this tooth. This is coming out of the sternite, whereas the tooth on the tegula, I mean why is that escaping me? The tooth on the what's the opposite of sternites? Gosh, why am I not even tergites? Yeah,
and which number of sternite is this on?
So this is, well, the sternite here, I believe this is S6. I'm not 100% sure, X6 or X7. And the but it would look like, so here's a pygidial plate above. It would look, because of where it is, it would look like it's part of, if you were looking down this side, you might see that sticking out. Think it's the tooth on T7, but the reality is it is coming out from underneath. So just beware. I'm looking up here, see if I can, might be up there. I can't see it from below. Anyway, sometimes leads to confusion. There are interesting things going down here that are useful at the species level. I think we have covered the main points there, and the females. Let's look at a, at the male. Let's look at a female now. Females also have the hooked, I'm doing two things at once. The hook spurs. Again, the visual is like a Pepinapis. But again, part of this is that they're considered to be in the same genus now. So if we look on the side, you see even more so than the males, you have this very bulging, almost parrot-like Clypeus here, which is a good indicator. Now we're going to see if we can find the round oval tegula and see if I did a good job scraping those things off. So this is not a great specimen, but it will do in terms of illuminating these things. It's a little goopy. We see these things so often that they often get given away rather than put back into our collection because we're not using it for these things. So I think that is the goopy side. This would be the tegula here. This is where so you can see how matted this is. This is a bad specimen. And something's going on out there, but you can't see. Now, theoretically, I have scraped this other one off on the tip enough that you'll be able to detect that the tegula is oval in composition. All right, so in perspective, this is the tegula here, and you can see, I think, that the tegula, as it goes towards the head, is more or less completely oval. So this is big, and it's usually wider too. In Melissodes, this curve would go something like this, and it would narrow down to a much narrower tip, but this side here would be flattened at minimum, often concave before turning around, generally less wide overall. So those two gives you a good notion that you're looking at Eucera. It is also out in the spring, so another good hint. Oh, people asked about the phenology thing. So on I don't know if anyone can find it. I'm not going to look it up right moment, but we can get it back to you. There's we have an account on SlideShare, which is basically you can put up PDFs and they change it into a little slideshow. We have a phenology of mid-Atlantic genera, so we lump everything together. And then we have a phenology for individual species that would probably have Eucera hamata. You can also go online for some of these species and groups. I don't know if they lump them by genus, though, in iNaturalist. So they're maybe a little less precise for a variety of reasons, but they're a good resource too. So now, Sphaestra and the mysteries of spoon-shaped. Put it away in the right place. And we'll come back and do, if we have time, Pepinapis. But right now, we're going to jump to Sphaestra. In general, Sphaestra are a lot larger. So these are, yeah.
Before going too far, we want to loop back around to the fact that there have been Eucera and Pepinapis that have been merged. Have we addressed that yet on Discover Life? Can you speak more to that? That's a today I learned kind of thing.
I haven't looked recently to see if John updated his lists and whether he even agrees with. I think I had a conversation where he thought that maybe it was inappropriate. We don't make taxonomic decisions. We just follow what John Asher does in terms of acceptable things. When you get into, there's a bunch of groups that people argue over. as to where even the boundaries are with genera. So you can look at some of the little panergynes, and whether you believe in Anthomergus or Pseudopanergus is a open question. So we have traditionally just followed John's work. I haven't looked recently to see whether he's, as most people seem to be doing, accepted the merger of Pepinapis, and there are a couple other groups with all into Eucera. Okay, so here we have a male Sphaestra. So first of all, it's big, so that should be a hint. Not though every single Sphaestra is big. On the males, which are going to be the same as in females, and I should have this on females, but I'm just noticing that you can very nicely see the oval tegula here. So we've got this oval tegula going on, and not the flattened one. Okay, now the gimme for a Sphaestra is the presence of flattened, spoon-tipped, or I think they're more appropriately spatula-tipped or knife-like hairs coming out. The primary place to look for them is coming out of the base of on T2, but out from underneath of T1. So here's the abdomen. T1 is here. This is T2. This is the apical rim of T1. Here are a bunch of hairs. And you can even at this distance in this particular specimen see that some of these hairs, I'm going to really crank it up to as much as I can here on Craig's microscope, and get you a picture, slowly I'm bringing this in, of these flattened hairs. So so here's the spatulate tips to them. They often, because there's these side feathers, they often just look like little flattened knives coming out. Sometimes there's only a few. So it's a lot of the other hairs in this area are what would be more or less normal hairs. And then there's a few of these flattened ones. Why they exist, I'm not sure. And sometimes they are, I'm going to move to a different section. They're truly tricky to see. And I'm going to try to, so here we are, the spatula tipped in a slightly different place, spatula tipped hairs. Again, one of those things that really was tricky to find, because if you haven't seen them and you're not seeing a lot of Sphaestra, which you generally don't, they're not a common bee. They tend to be high quality bee, I would call it. Good meadows, species rich areas, not your down and dirty Melissodes or Eucerine, or Eucera bee. So we can also look, another place that usually, I don't know if always is the case, has them is around the scutellum. So let's go to that area and see if we can see some. I believe I spotted them, if not on this, the female. So the rim between the scutum and the scutellum often has these hairs too. Once you get into a goopy specimen, though, it becomes tricky to find any of these specimens. So sometimes you have to put a specimen down and hope that you have another specimen of that species in better shape. And going through the collection, I have a lot of these species memorized, but a lot of the Melissodes and sometimes even Sphaestras and stuff, I've just got to set aside and key them out again.
Sam, we're looking at a female Sphaestra right now, right?
Nope, male.
No, male. Okay, so do both male and female have these hairs?
Yes. So I'm not seeing great hairs here, as is often the case in the scutellum. We'll look on the female in a second. If we look at the head, we'll see not greatly projecting. Clypeus, like Melissodes, was not greatly projecting. We'll see that even though this is a male, the antennae are not really as long. We'll do it this way. Are not really as long. They're long, but not super long like the Melissodes and Eucera clan. And I'm going to spin this a little bit sideways. And when we get down in there and look at the antennae itself, we see that F1 is relatively long compared to F2 in contrast to, so this, here's F1, here's F2. In Melissodes, you can get F1, a ratio of F1 to F2 is like 1 to 12, 1 to 10, very common. Here, we're much more down towards 1 to 3, 1 to 4, maybe, in differences. So that's another, I think, general indicator for Svastra if you can't find those lovely spatulate hairs. But you already know it's not Melissodes because you can always scrape hairs off, even if it's a horrible specimen, and look at the shape of the tegula. On the males, if we go back to the rear end again, I'm not 100% sure. I believe I usually can pick out the spatulate hairs on these things, so I'm not paying too much attention. I have looked it up though, so it is worth talking about. I believe they only have a tooth on T6 and not on T7. I could be wrong. I looked at this specimen quickly before we started. I could not find anything on T7. So if someone wants to put into chat anything about that, or we can follow up on that, that would be fine. But I, for the life of me, could not find anything on T7. And I think it is the case. Like Eucera, it only has teeth at the far edges of the tergites on T6. Pygidial plate, again, there. Also, while big, not that useful. Within the species groups, there's a lot of hair pattern things going on to separate out the species. This is Svastra obliqua, our most common species in the East. You get out the female, but the ID string is remarkably the same, which will be to realize that it's a Eucera. You can confirm that with the hairs inside the wings. Often some of these species have very dark wings. And if you see, so you might, and it's big, and so you might be like, oh, I should check. That's probably Svastra. Let's go check to see if there's spatulate hairs coming out under T2. I have no idea, again, why T2, just T2, and what the function might be of these hairs, but the way they glisten and they're wider, even though we don't have great resolution on this picture, gives you a good indication of what you're looking for. And the fact that they're reflecting light means they're not just thin lines. So here, these are spatulate tips, not great shots. But again, Clare probably can take some pictures of some great shots. But I can tell you I've spent a lot of time on some specimens looking for just one or two of these hairs. So often it is the case that they're not easy to spot. Oops. Trying to bring in the side here. And they also, as you can kind of see there, have hairs all over the internal cells of their wing. There's the papillate edges too. Again, I'm not sure what the ID things are. So the resolution, and because there's a lot of gloss, is not helpful, but you can see these widened reflective tips and a lot of the hairs. In this particular case, you can see a lot of these hairs are not spatulate, and that's not the case that they would ever be all spatulate tipped. And so often it's just a small fraction of the totals.
Sam, we keep saying that Savastra are big. Can you describe big in comparison to a honeybee or something else easily?
Far bigger than a honeybee. I would say that if we compared it to the average worker, it would be about the size of a Bombus pennsylvanicus worker. So big. We're looking at now the junction, often like this one, a little goopy and very difficult to see with reflection. So I can't see any, vaguely there might be some there. This is the less likely, less easy to see, harder to see, fewer in general hair zone for spatulate hairs along this scutellum boundary. I really don't see anything going on here with this resolution, but you could maybe imagine that some of those hairs are spatulate tipped. This is holding the specimen in your fingers and rocking it back and forth. Often you're using, like a few of those down there might be, using the reflection of the hairs as a guide often reveals these things. Another reason to really become comfortable with using your fingers. We're looking at the tegula again, and from this angle, this side I don't think I cleared, this one I did. And again, nice, smooth, you can see the entire upper edge, not flattened, certainly not concave, relatively wide going on there. Okay, now we can jump to Pepinapis, or Eucera, as you will. And Pepinapis looks a lot like Hamata, but is not going to have the hamate tibial spur. But the coloration on the abdomen looks really similar. The key, as when you try and key these out to Pepinapis, is a hair pattern that again is a hard to see one on the hind legs. So people get confused by this all the time. We probably could use an upgrade in talking about it in the guides, but it's also difficult to describe. So here's a female, abdomen, legs, basotarsus. So this basotarsus has lots of pollen-carrying hairs on it, and you can see these outer ones here, and there's some here. There are a set of long hairs which are going to grab hold of pollen. What we're going to look for, and we're going to dive in a couple directions, is another set of hairs that are below the height by at least half the height of the long hairs that run along that basotarsus on the what would be the anterior edge if this leg were standing straight up. So that's it. They're orange too, so that's another sort of hint. You're going to look for that orange patch through there to tell you that's Pepinapis. It does not have, there's other Eucerines that look like it. So just the fact that it does not have the hamate or hooked tips is not a gimme. So there are the hairs. Let's see if I can find a better position to show. The problem with this specimen is the legs are pretty tucked in. So that really does not reveal anything.
Male or female right now?
Female. This is only in the female, this character. Okay, you can see it, I think, somewhat here, at least in a shadow sense. So additionally, compared to other groups like Eucera and Sphaestra and things like that, these hairs are relatively sparse. So these are the pollen-carrying hairs. These are specialists, as most of you know, on pumpkins and squash, which have gigundo large pollens grains. So the response has been, these are very, so this bee is optimized for handling the pollen obscuring the tibia, I mean the basotars. You can see it right through there, right? So in other groups like Melissodes and whatnot, usually you can't see the integument at all. And this right here, this orange line, this denser orange line, that's this other group of shorter hairs that live beneath along the anterior edge, if it were to be standing up, of the basotarsus. And that's the ID key for Pepinapis. So we're if we're running out of time, maybe I'll just ask up there so you can see the honking big, and so you can see why people would consider it Eucera. Clypeus. But in thinking about this, I think other things like Semalobus also were lumped into Eucera, which does not have this character. But that's for another day, I guess. So, Claire, are there any questions?
You skipped for a second there with talking about the sparse pollen carrying hairs, but I think we covered, think we followed you. I was wondering though if you could move back so I could grab a screenshot that didn't have the cursor in it.
Here's the, so this is even more than the basotarsus. That's on the other side is that line of dense, small orange hairs. But the hairs overall are sparse compared to other. Let me pull the Hamada again, female, and we'll contrast that. And of course, you can look at these things in the lab. And we hope that people are practicing too with their own specimens or specimens they are collecting out there. Okay, I'm going to jump here and just drop in and we'll see if the density, this is Hamada, so it's the Pepinapis lookalike in my opinion. If the hairs, as per Michener's guide, who uses this character, are that much denser. And maybe that's why I never liked that character. It doesn't look that much denser to me. So, maybe it's not that great of a character. And also, it's perhaps a species level character now that they've been lumped together. Again, I should have done my homework and seen if we are going to go with that presentation. Right now, we don't. We have made no changes to our general, which is, it's not going to hurt anything, but in a publication, you may be asked to change the names. Any other questions?
We don't have any in the chat, but I invite you to unmute yourself should you have a question. And I have a hard stop in 3 minutes, so that's a thing that's happening.
Is that because you're going clubbing with your child?
Obviously, that is the activity that we partake in after daycare. I hear Legos happening downstairs.
Okay. All right, maybe we have a wrap.
Yeah. We have a request for more Eucera ? Yeah, what do you think we're gonna work into next week? Are we gonna?
Well, it seemed natural that, so my Cemalova specimens, actually, they got sent to, what was that? Was it Yale Mandalik? Or was it one of her students in Israel that redid the Eucerines? I sent them to her or to him. I can't remember who I sent them to. So I don't have any Cemalovas at the moment, but I do have, or should have, Floralagus. What other Eucerines? I don't have handy Tetraloniella. I can look around for that, and then we certainly could bleed over into Habropoda and Anthophora, which are about the same size and sort of floofy, and tackle that.
Okay, so we'll talk about that, and I'll send out an update on, if you want to have a bee next to you, what to prep for. We have a question: backup characters for IDing Peponapus.
Backup characters? Yeah, so the in the males, they have a pretty distinct, what am I saying? A pretty distinct clipial mark most of the time, which is there's a dull and very smudgy yellow mark at the center edge of the clipius. I believe, I want to say, I think the mandibles are dark. So there's another one, Xenoglossa, which may or may not also be lumped now with the other Euceros that have other characters. There's an odd, and it's like Xenoglossa has a tooth underneath its mandible that is extremely difficult to see because you have to have the mandible open to see it. Yeah, I'd have to look up and see what it's sometimes it's with those, it's it when you see it. But I believe they're all Eucera now, so it would be at a species level, depending on who you believe.
Who you believe. All right, friends, I'm going to stop the recording and wrap this up. I did take some pictures, some screenshots, but I think I'm going to follow up with some the Melissodes tegula, maybe some other Sevastra pictures sometime in the next week.
Thanks, Claire.
Have a good week, everyone.